Your most important NASCAR betting stop of the day returns. He's Cole Cusumano. I'm Steven Cusumano. Together, we're the Cusumano Bros, and this is the Money Stop presented by Kicking the Tires. Cole, splash and go. Let's get right into this. We've got one of the most fun race weekends of the year, Memorial Day weekend, the Coke 600 on tap. But first, want to just splash and go. A couple topics that are kind of circulating around NASCAR right now. Number one, Brad Keselowski, the winner at Darlington. We have not touched on that yet, but he is finally back in victory lane. Fords are finally in victory lane, and they did it 2 straight weeks. Joey Logano wins the All-Star race. We've also got Kyle Larson running the Indy 500 Coke 600 double. We had some fists thrown between Ricky Stenhouse Jr. and Kyle Busch. So 2 weeks later, after we last spoke, Cole, on top of all that, we've got the Coke 600 this week, so there's a lot to catch up on. But as I throw all those topics at you, what sticks out?
A lot. It's been a phenomenal time to be a NASCAR fan. I mean, that BK win was coming off that photo finish at Kansas, and it just felt so great to see that, Brad K back in victory lane, waving the American flag, doing the Polish victory lap. It just felt right. Haven't seen it in, 110 races, so I'm curious to see what that team can do now with a win under their belt as a driver, team owner of that RFK Racing. And, Fords look really good these last couple of weeks. Obviously, BK wins that race at Darlington. Joey Logano wins the All-Star race. No points on the line for that one, obviously, but still nonetheless, much-needed positive day for that 22 camp and what's been a really long season thus far. So I'm excited to see where we go here. Coke 600, as we've mentioned numerous times throughout this show's existence, is my personal favorite race weekend of the entire year. It is the epitome of what makes NASCAR so great, what makes motorsports so great as a whole, with the Indy 500 the same day as well. I just, having the longest race of the year held that day at NASCAR's home in Charlotte, it always spoke to me. Having the pre-race festivities honoring the fallen military heroes is always, it hits home for me. Obviously, having family that have served in the military and are currently serving in the military. Just a great weekend overall. And again, I love as much racing as possible. So to have 600 miles of it is the best thing in the world to me.
Yeah, this is straight up probably my most favorite race weekend of the year. And I realized after last week's episode, or 2 weeks ago, that I might have misspoke because I said that Throwback Week has the best paint schemes of the entire season, but I would actually disagree and say that the patriotic schemes that we see at races like the Coke 600 are also some of my favorites. And looking at what we have on tap this week as far as paint schemes go, Cole, this might be the best actual weekend of the year, even better than Throwback Week, because you look at some of these cars, and it's really fun to see as our nickel or dime segment has moved to social media at @the_money_stop. Keep this pretty short, Cole. Any car that has red, white, and blue, I'm a big fan of in general, especially this week, honoring the fallen military heroes of our nation, and it's a really good week for paint schemes. There's a lot of dimes and not a whole lot of nickels this week.
Without a doubt, I 1,000% agree. It's the best weekend for paint schemes in the entire season. I love the red, white, and blues, honoring the military. And just to give you one dime that I like a lot, or I'll give you two, because it's really hard to give just one. I love the number 10 of Noah Gragson. It's a Winchester, obviously American flag-themed Ford Mustang Dark Horse. Looks excellent. We'll throw a graphic up here really shortly. And then the other one I liked a lot was the Chris Buescher number 17. And this one's interesting for me because I don't typically gravitate towards the camo paint schemes for the Coke 600, but this one's really cool and really well done. So the middle of the car where the door number is and the sponsor by the rear wheel, that's all camo. And then the nose and the tail of the car are black, and there's like a very, very subtle red, white, and blue line going between the black and the camo. So it looks really cool, really sleek, and I love this weekend as well for paint schemes.
I'll give you two as well. I'll keep this short. I mean, I feel like I always tout the Hendrick paint schemes, but it's just they do such a great job, and I am obsessed with the Ally 48 this week. Looks so fresh, and I love the military camo, blue military camo 24 car, which I think Willie B ran, if it wasn't the exact same one, a very similar one last year in this race, and it's one of my favorite all-time paint schemes. I love it's just a whole vibe. I mean, the entire weekend, Memorial Day weekend, you get these patriotic paint schemes, and something about it just feels like this is the gateway to summer, honestly. So really exciting stuff on that side of things. And also, again, like you mentioned, competitively, the Fords have really come on, and we'll see if that comes into play here as we get to NASCAR's longest event, the crown jewel, one of the crown jewels in the sport, the Coca-Cola 600. We're going to have qualifying for this long 600-mile race at 5:50 Eastern Time on Saturday, so take that into consideration as we look to take it to the bank, Cole. Let's look at some pre-qualifying odds per BetMGM. We talked about another brief storyline. Kyle Larson running the double. He's going to run the Indianapolis 500, then fly over to Charlotte and run in the Coke 600, and in spite of that, he is Vegas's favorite to win the Coke 600 at plus 475, leading Denny Hamlin at plus 575. You got Tyler Reddick at plus 850, Ryan Blaney plus 900, and then William Byron at plus 950, Cole. So as we look at some favorites for this race, the favorites for this week are a lot like the favorites every week because I'll start this off. It leads off with Kyle Larson, who, again, thinking about this double and how it might impact him, well, it sure didn't impact him in the All-Star race because he didn't even qualify his car. He had to start at the back of the pack after Indy 500 qualifying, and still, with no seat time in that All-Star race machine, he finished fourth after qualifying and making the cut and ultimately getting sixth in Indy qualifying less than 2 hours before the All-Star race. That is the type of thing I feel like only Kyle Larson can do. He's won 2 of the 3.5-mile races this year. He's also led the most laps at these tracks with 302. And in the next gen at Charlotte, he has finished 9th and 30th, which feels a little bit fluky. Only 52 laps led. But remember, 2021 dominated the Coke 600, the first running of this race in the next gen car, and he won with over 320 laps led. He was the dominant car that day. And I don't know about you, Cole, before I get to my next favorite, the double aspect of this doesn't faze me. Because even if it did faze me, this is a 600-mile race, and I have full confidence that when Kyle Larson gets into this car, even if it's not to his liking, the setup's not to his liking, he has 600 miles to figure it out. And as we've seen, he and Cliff Daniels are one of the best pairings in the garage when it comes to making adjustments, adapting on the fly, adjusting to the track, playing into the race. The fact that this is a 600-mile race makes me feel better about him running the double than if this was, say, a 400-miler.
Yeah, and truth be told, if it was anybody else, I wouldn't feel as optimistic, but Kyle Larson is quite simply the best driver on the planet. He's in incredible shape. He could wheel anything to victory lane, as proven numerous times. And I just feel like, the only thing that kind of casts doubt in my mind is the weather aspect of it all, because there's been talk of weather potentially impacting both races. And Rick Hendrick commented that he'd like to keep Kyle in Indy. Larson said his priorities kind of are with the Coke 600, so it's kind of like up in the air in a way. But I feel like they're going to find a way to make this work, whether they delay the Coke 600 or even if it gets pushed back to Monday. But I think that no matter what, Kyle Larson is going to be a strong contender for this win. He's been the cream of the crop on the mile and a half this year. Those 302 laps led are 40% of the laps led on the mile and a half tracks this year. So really, really dominant on those tracks, and it's one of his best tracks in general, as made evident by that Coke 600 win in 2021. So I do not have a whole lot of doubts about Kyle Larson, the driver, as a talent, but maybe the impending weather could shake things up.
It's a good thing to point out, and the backup plan for Hendrick is if Kyle, by some chance, cannot run the Indy 500, Tony Kanaan, a former Indy 500 champion, would take over in that 17 machine. But hopefully all goes well. Hopefully both races get in, ideally on Sunday. And as you're looking at Kyle Larson as the easy favorite on mile-and-a-half tracks this year, the other guy that's been the most consistent in the garage is Denny Hamlin. He's plus 575 for the win. These are the two most expensive DFS drivers at Kyle Larson, $11,000. Denny Hamlin, $10,700, $300 cheaper. And he continued his season-long laps leading streak to 13 races, extending it at Darlington. He's also got a 3-race top 5 streak, finished second in the All-Star race. And at mile-and-a-half tracks this year, just one bad finish. He finished 8th, 30th, and 5th. So take out that one 8th place finish. You've got an average inside the top 7 on mile-and-a-halfs this year for Denny Hamlin, who has over 120 laps led between those 3 starts. He had the most laps led at Kansas. His only Charlotte win came in his next-gen debut. DNF in his last start here, 12.7 average finish, is the best of drivers with 10-plus starts in the garage, which there are 32 of them. So Denny Hamlin has always had Charlotte be one of his most consistent tracks. He has been the most consistent driver in the garage this year. You can expect him to start up front, run fast laps, finish up front. And again, if it's not Kyle Larson, who is the surest bet in this race, maybe outside of the the uncertainty that comes with doing the double, I would say that if that scares you away, Denny Hamlin is another guy that brings a whole lot of confidence to me and really insurance when it comes to maybe a safer pick than Kyle Larson, I would say.
I obviously love both those picks a lot. The two best drivers in the sport by a mile, I would call it. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here because there's two drivers I'm looking at for this weekend who are not being talked about a lot. They have not been talked about a whole lot this season, I don't really believe. But they should be talked about, especially for this week. And the first one I'm going to mention is someone who's always brought up on the mile-and-a-half tracks in the next-gen era, and that is Tyler Reddick, who has the third shortest odds at plus 850 for the race win and an outstanding value at $9,700. I'm going to stop right there for 1 second. That $9,700 for DFS, when building our lineup for later in the show, I immediately went to him because after reading through these stats, you'll see why. But that is an outstanding number for someone who is a favorite in our minds. He's finished top 5 in 2 of 3 mile-and-a-half tracks this year, including runner-up at Vegas, which, as we know, could have very well been a victory lane trip had it been one lap longer. The last mile-and-a-half start was at Kansas, which we all had very high expectations for, and he finished, I believe it was outside the top 20, or maybe it was 20th, but either way, it was a very puzzling day, not a whole lot of rhyme or reason to their struggles, but then you look at what he backed it up with. So he went to Darlington, started from the pole, led the most laps, wound up with the DNF. Fast forward to last week at the All-Star race, he was kind of a no-show again. So I look at this week, or the All-Star race weekend, as a reset, and for someone who's been incredible on the mile-and-a-halfs in the next-gen era, it cannot come at a better time for Tyler Reddick, because looking at his Charlotte resume in the Cup Series, he's finished top 10 in 4 of 5 starts, with the lowest finish of 14th and the best finish of 5th, which came in the most recent race of the Coke 600 last year. So I love Tyler Reddick this week. I think his values are outstanding, and I think he has as great a shot as both Larson and Hamlin. But the other guy I want to mention, who's not even in the top 5 for race winner odds, is someone who we should be talking about a lot more, both in 2024 and for Charlotte, for great reason. And that's going to be MTJ, Martin Truex Jr., who's plus 1,000 for the race win and $9,500 for DFS. In 2024, we've documented this numerous times. He has been one of, if not the most consistent drivers the entire season, posting a 10.2 average through 13 starts, which is the second best average in the series, and he's second in the standings. So he's been incredible this season. On the mile-and-a-halfs, he has a 7th-place finish, 14th-place finish, and a 4th-place finish. So really, really solid stat line there. A lot of optimism in my mind for that. And then at Charlotte, he leads the series and wins. He's a 3-time winner. He last won in 2019. And when I think of Charlotte, I think of MTJ because all 3 of those wins, he spent tormenting the competition in the 600. Over 1,000 laps led, 1,059 to be exact, which is the second most in the garage to Kyle Busch, obviously. 3.7 average is the third best average finish of drivers with 10-plus starts, and he finished 12th and 3rd in the next-gen car, 3rd being his most recent effort in 2023. So I love MTJ. I know he's not the most flashiest driver. That's kind of like his MO. He'll be very consistent, and then when he gets the wins, they'll be very dominant. So I think it's easy to overlook both these drivers, but especially Martin Truex Jr., and I think both have a really good shot at going to victory lane this weekend in the 600.
There's a lot of contenders for this race. It's one of those that time and time again we see it won by former champions, future champions, and out of the guys that we just named, Kyle Larson, Martin Truex Jr., both former champions, and I think that you could definitely say when it comes to Denny Hamlin, Tyler Reddick, they are both potential contenders for the championship this year. So it's a race where you can really make a statement, and as we look to our sleepers, Cole, I'm looking at a lot of experienced drivers, including your drivers. This is 3 out of 4 drivers that we're going to mention are former champions. One you could argue is a contender for the championship. Needless to say, experience pays at the Coca-Cola 600. And how about the 2020 NASCAR Cup Series champion, Chase Elliott, who's plus 1,100 for the race win this week. He's been one of the strongest drivers in the garage this season since rehabbing and coming back full-heartedly from the leg injury last year. He has looked like full form Chase Elliott with the win under his belt this year. 9,300 in daily fantasy. He's got a 9.8 average finish, which is the best in the series. He sits 4th in the standings right now, confirming his results as one of the most consistent drivers. And outside of Kyle Larson's 2-mile-and-a-half track wins this year, he is the lone winner on a mile-and-a-half track with 12th and 3rd place finishes in his other 2-mile-and-a-half starts. He's yet to finish a race in the next-gen car at Charlotte, which tells you that his statistics there over the last 3 years have been a little bit of a fluke. But he does have a 4-race top 5 streak in the races prior, including 1 win with 2 runner-ups. So prior to this next-gen era at Charlotte, he was one of the best drivers at this track. And now that he is, in my opinion, fully returned to form, I think you can expect that to remain the case. And also for Chase Elliott, he's led laps in his last 6 starts at Charlotte. So there's a little bit more uncertainty with Chase than the other 4 drivers we named. That's why he's one of the sleepers this week. But in spite of him being a sleeper, once again, he's outside the top 5 in odds. Would not be surprised at all if Chase Elliott came away with a win in this race. But how about the most recent race winner, Cole, a former champion and the All-Star winner, Joey Logano, who dominated the All-Star race at North Wilkesboro. He's plus 2,500 for the win, a long shot at 8,800 in daily fantasy. And Ryan Blaney won the 600 last year following Ford struggles. So that's something we haven't really discussed, is that this winless streak by Ford wasn't necessarily unprecedented. We saw it last year. Ryan Blaney won the 600, and again, right on par, he was the champion. That's what I mean when I started this whole spiel about former champions, future champions winning this race. There's a statement to be made, and Joey Logano certainly made one in the All-Star race, and as he put it himself, he'd like to do it in a points-paying race too, and look for some momentum to be on his side. It's been hard for him to find good stats this season, but Joey has had really good success at the mile-and-a-half tracks this year. One of his 3 top 10s this year came at Vegas. He's led laps in 2 of the 3 mile-and-a-half track starts this year. In the next-gen car, he's finished 20th and 21st at Charlotte. He won there in 2016. His last top 10 there was all the way back in 2020, which was 4 races ago. He's got a 13.1 average finish, which is the second best among active drivers with 10-plus starts. His 25 starts at Charlotte. So Joey's been able to stand the test of time at this track. He's got the recency on his side. He's run well. Even when the Fords have not run well, he's run well at the mile-and-a-half tracks. And now that the Fords are looking a lot quicker as of recently, I expect Joey Logano to be a top 5 to top 10 car and potentially a race winner pick this week.
I think I'm more intrigued than anything to see how Joey Logano does following that win at North Wilkesboro. I think you look back again to last year at this race, and yeah, like Logano won the race at Atlanta, obviously. That's a drafting track. But after that, they went on like a 9-race skid where they were held winless, and then Blaney came out and won the 600. So, again, like you said, it's not really like an anomalous thing for Ford to have these struggles, but I think you look at Charlotte as a track where they can definitely rebound. And for someone like Joey, who's had success here and sustained success in the form of that average finish of 13.1, that's definitely bodes well for him and the Ford camp. Chase Elliott as well. I mean, I don't look at those 2 next-gen starts as anything really concrete, something I can really trust in. I look at those 4 races prior, the 4 top 5s, the win, the 2 runner-ups. That's Chase Elliott that I'm expecting to show up this weekend. This has always been one of his best tracks. He has so much pride in racing in the 600, and he actually reminds me a lot of the next guy I'm about to mention for my sleeper in Brad Keselowski. Brad K is always someone I think of when we come to Charlotte, especially the 600, because he holds this race in such high regard. And, when he got that win back in 2020, it really stuck with me because you could tell how much it meant to him. Obviously, his tradition is waving the American flag out of the car, obviously. So to see him finally get that elusive win all those years later in his career, was really cool, and it was also his final year with Penske, so big moment for that team. Always been one of his best tracks, and I'm really curious to see how he does coming off that win at Darlington, first win as a team owner for RFK Racing. And one thing that stuck with me about that win from Darlington, from both Keselowski and his teammate, was he obviously was very excited about the win, but he said, "I cannot wait for the 600," and that made me think that maybe they had something for this weekend, because you look at what they did so far in the mile-and-a-half this year. Brad K, 13th, 2nd, and 11th. That's a really solid stat line. I know it's not the flashiest one, but it's consistent. It's very respectable. And that there tells me that wasn't them at their best, and that they, might have hit on something, because Buescher's come home runner-up twice. Brad's got 2 runner-ups and the win now. And they've come so close, and I think Ford may have finally found something with the 2 straight wins at Kansas and then Darlington and North Wilkesboro. So why not Charlotte? He's a 2-time winner here, last back in 2020. Finished 30th and 19th in the next gen, but I'm not taking a whole lot of stock into that. Just coming off the momentum, he's been one of the most consistent drivers the entire season. I like Brad K a lot this weekend, as well as his teammate, Chris Buescher, who has the same odds for the race win at plus 1,100 and is valued at $8,500. I actually misspoke. Brad K is $8,700, so disregard that. $200 more expensive. Either way, two very similar drivers I'm taking stock into for this race. Chris Buescher, runner-up in the most recent mile-and-a-half race, obviously, and the closest finish in Cup Series history to Kyle Larson. Back that up with another potential race-winning car in Darlington. We all know how that went with Tyler Reddick. Slide job gone wrong. Ended up with like a 20th place day out of it. But then you look at last week, non-points paying all-star race, finished third once again. So Chris Buescher is one of the hottest drivers in the garage area. RFK and the Ford stable are streaking right now, and I have a lot of faith in that team that they could do a lot of good things in the 600. You look at last year, 8 laps led. I think that bodes very well for Chris Buescher in the 600 this weekend.
Yeah, with this Ford resurgence, honestly, RFK has carried the torch with, obviously, I know Joey won last week's race, but even prior to Brad's win at Darlington, it was Chris Buescher who came within 1,000th of a second of winning the first race for Ford last year. So I expect a really big day from both of those RFK drivers. As far as value picks, though, Cole, this is where it's, again, this is a race that favors veterans, it favors experience, but you're not going to find a lot of that here in our value picks. There's not going to be any former champions, so we got to dig a little bit deeper. And a guy that's made us look pretty smart over the past couple of weeks is Carson Hocevar. You've preached his bell for a lot of the last few weeks, and he's ran very well, top 10 speed at times, and he is valued at 6,300 in daily fantasy, one of the best value picks. Mentioned him for the last mile-and-a-half track, and he finished 24th, but again, harping on what I just finished talking about, he was running top 12, top 10 that entire race. In his other 2 mile-and-a-half starts, he finished 10th and 15th, and I think you can argue that at Darlington, that was maybe his best mile-and-a-half, at least performance, but he just didn't get the result for it. Ran top 15 for a majority of the day at Kansas, I should say. But Carson Hocevar, anytime we go to a mile-and-a-half track, I'm a big fan of his, including this week. Also want to touch on Harrison Burton because in both of his Charlotte Cup starts, he's looked really good, respectable. Finished 11th and 18th. Other than that this year, there's obviously some risk because he's got no finish better than 28th at our 3 mile-and-a-half tracks this season in 2024, but Charlotte's been the anomaly for him in his 2 Cup starts here, a pair of top 20s. So, again, you're not looking for someone that's going to win the race with these kind of price points at 5,700, but in someone like Harrison Burton, you're looking for him to finish top 10, top 15, top 10 would be amazing, but top 15, top 20 ideally at a $5,700 price range. So I'm looking to dig deep with these 2 value picks, Cole. Carson Hocevar and Harrison Burton are guys that, you know, when you're filling out your DFS lineup with your aces, you can definitely stack a few guys like this that have a pretty high ceiling at some point at the back of that lineup.
Yeah, and Carson Hocevar is someone who I always like coming to the mile-and-a-half tracks. Obviously, you mentioned the top 15, top 10 speed. And I just think he's a very polished young driver. So he's someone who I feel very comfortable in no matter what. I know it's a very long race. He's a very young driver, but I feel like he's very mature, and he has matured a lot at his age. So $6,300 is a really good value for him. Harrison Burton, we've mentioned him before on the show, not in a positive light, as one of our DFS donuts, I think we called them. But looking at this week, I think he's someone we could definitely take a chance on, and he's someone who could probably win you a lot of money if he does, you know, pay off and get that top 15 finish, top 20 finish. So the 2 drivers I'm looking at, they're going to be more bigger names, more stability from that front, and the first one's going to be Noah Gragson, obviously, who's been a mainstay in this category, and I think he will be a mainstay in this category for the foreseeable future. He scored his 5th top 10 on the last mile-and-a-half track at Kansas, finished 14th as well at Darlington, and impressively, he now sits 19th in the standings after being as low as 34th with a penalty at one point this season. So he's had an impeccable climb through the standings, been very consistent, one of the best 4 drivers the entire season, and that is made evident by his 16.7 average. Just very, very extremely dependable for DFS. I love his value. I love him every single week pretty much, but especially on the mile-and-a-half tracks, intermediate tracks. And he's done nothing for us to dissuade him from picking him. So I love Noah Gragson this weekend, as well as his teammate Josh Berry, who is valued at $7,100. Obviously one of the more veteran drivers in this category, which bodes well for what we've been touting as a experience-heavy track race with 600. So he's coming off his first top 10 of the year at Darlington, which was a 3rd-place effort. And he also was a winner at Charlotte in the Xfinity Series, so he knows how to get to victory lane here. And you mentioned it during the sleeper analysis, the importance of the experience, physicality, stamina, all the stuff that's associated with completing a 600-mile race. I think Josh Berry has proven to have those qualities in his young Cup career and in the Xfinity Series, because I've seen glimpses of this at Bristol, Darlington, and Dover as recently as this year in the Cup Series, but also in the Xfinity Series. I mean, he's just proven to be a very, very strong-willed and determined driver, and I think he's someone who's just goes out there and gets the job done. Like, it might not be pretty, but I think when it's all said and done, Josh Berry's going to be contending for a top 10 finish in this race.
Yeah, look at how the tables have turned here, Cole. We needed to see it before we believed it out of the Fords, and lo and behold, our sleepers and value picks are studded with Fords this week, and I love all those picks, especially, like you said, with the experience factor being on Josh Berry's side. Let's narrow this field of 12 drivers down to 6, Cole. 1 sleeper, 1 value, 1 favorite each. I will take Kyle Larson from the favorites category. Again, just really taking into consideration the fact that a 600-mile race caters into his and Cliff Daniels' wheelhouse, and the fact that, again, in spite of the Indy Coke 600 double doubt, I'm not doubting him. I am doubling down, in fact, on Kyle Larson in terms of my confidence in him. And for my sleeper, I'll take Chase Elliott. For my value pick, I will take Carson Hocevar.
Awesome. I am very high on Tyler Reddick this weekend, so he'll be my favorite for sure. I like Chris Buescher from the RFK duo. I love what I've seen from that team the last pretty much month plus. He's been outstanding the entire season. And then for my value pick, between these SHR Fords, let's go with Noah Gragson. He's just been stellar this season, in my opinion. Mentioned that 16.7 average finish, which is really respectable for a value pick. And he's just been, he's really surprised me this year. I liked him a lot.
Let's go with some head-to-head bets here, Cole, because that's a pretty good field of 6 drivers. I'm going to rattle these off. Let me know if any stick out to you. We've got, as far as the BetMGM head-to-head bets, Kyle Larson versus William Byron. You got old 7-time Jimmy Johnson versus Ricky Stenhouse Jr., Kyle Busch versus Ryan Blaney, Joey Logano versus Tyler Reddick, Chase Elliott versus Brad Keselowski, and Kyle Busch versus Ricky Stenhouse Jr. I'd like to see that in a boxing ring, let alone in a DFS bet. But I'm not feeling great about any of those, Cole, I'll be honest.
I'm not either. There are a lot of swing matchups. I'm not touching any Busch or Stenhouse prop because the potential for retaliation. I don't think anything's going to happen. I mean, you never know. The Kyle Busch of old might come out and start some fireworks here in the 600, but I don't see it. But either way, I would stay away from any matchup involving those two. The only one that I kind of like is Reddick over Logano, which for those odds, Reddick's favorite at minus 175. That's not enough for me to really put any big money down on that. I would definitely focus more of my assets towards race winner or prop bets for a top 5.
Let's talk through daily fantasy, Cole. Again, reinforcing, as we do every week, the fact that I don't want you to lock in any DFS bets until we've seen the starting lineup because of the all-important possibility for place differential points and how drivers that start up front, that could impact their ability to lead laps and have fastest run laps. So take this for what it's worth. We've got a couple variations of a lineup here, Cole. It kind of depends on whether you prefer Toyota versus Chevy, but we've got a few linchpins in our DFS wheelhouse this week. Josh Berry at 7,100, really good anchor to build your lineup around, as well as another median price driver in Noah Gragson, who's 7,500 this week. And outside of him, you got Chris Buescher as well, 8,500. I think those 3 drivers are a really good way to start your lineup. And then you need some aces, and the cheapest of our aces was Tyler Reddick at 9,700. So I feel like starting your DFS lineup with those 4 drivers is a really good starting point. Where you go from there is up for interpretation. I personally like the direction of a couple Hendrick Chevys. Alex Bowman, who we have not talked about, 7,800. Chase Elliott, one of our favorite sleepers of the week, valued at 9,300.
Yes, so I failed to mention during the value pick segment, there were 2 drivers that were more higher profile names with, I guess, better stats, but bigger money that I was going to give you the option of choosing, and both actually made the proposed lineups that we have here. So Alex Bowman, he has finished 10th and 12th in the 600 the last 2 years in the next-gen era, so really, really consistent, really, really respectable, and he's been solid the last month or so. Turn things on a bit. But the lineup that I was more partial to, it was Toyota heavy. So obviously the 4 drivers you mentioned, Berry, Busher, Gregson, Reddick. For my other ace, as opposed to Chase Elliott, I went with Martin Truex Jr., who is $9,500 for DFS. He's dominated this track so many times before. He's been one of the best drivers the entire season, so I like that quite a bit. And I was able to fit him by putting Bubba Wallace in this lineup. And I like Bubba Wallace a lot as well for this week because we've noted 2311's prowess in the mile-and-a-half tracks the entire season and the next-gen era. He did not finish the first next-gen race for the 600, but last year he finished 4th place with laps led. So that's more like the Bubba Wallace I associate with mile-and-a-half tracks in the next-gen era. So that's the one that I feel is going to come to play this weekend. But he was actually $100 cheaper than Alex Bowman, who was $7,800 for DFS, and that was how I was able to afford Truex as opposed to Chase Elliott. But again, pick your poison, Chevy, Toyota. I go Toyota, you go Chevy. Yeah.
I think either way you look at it, this is a week where, in terms of the values, there are some good values to be had. So if you just have those anchors that you kind of side with, I think it's a good starting point for you. And then, again, you got to go with your gut to some point as well. But, Cole, I want to move on to some big money bets here. These are our favorite prop bets of the week. We talked about our DFS lineups, which, again, we'll lock in prior to the start of the race when we know all of the starting positions. But as far as big money bets, Cole, I feel like the value to be had this week is in the top 5 prop bets, not the top 10. So you look at the top 5 prop bets. I really like Brad Keselowski plus 150. I like Chris Buescher, his teammate, at plus 150, and then Chase Elliott at plus 160. That, to me, feels like kind of the sweet spot for my favorite prop bets of the week. I feel like if you look at any of our sleepers and our favorites, and you look at their top 5 prop bet, I feel like that's a pretty good starting point as far as big money bets, prop bets go this week. But those 3 I listed are probably my favorite.
Yeah, I'm in the same boat as you. Top 5s for sure have the best value this week. My 3 favorites are going to be Reddick to finish top 5 plus 110, MTJ top 5 plus 135, and then Chris Buescher top 5 at plus 150. Yeah, I don't see a whole lot of value outside of that sweet spot. Even the top 10 props aren't the best. I mean, you have like Bubba Wallace and Alex Bowman, who we just mentioned, are both plus 105 to finish top 10, which isn't bad. They're actually pretty solid for a big money bet. I feel more optimistic about Tyler Reddick and Chris Buescher and MTJ as opposed to Bubba Wallace or Alex Bowman getting that top 10. I know it's a smaller window, obviously, for the top 5, but just given their performance this year and as of late, those seem the most logical in my opinion.
Let's get down to business here, Cole. Let's talk about our race winner picks. After Darlington, my pick was first. I picked Kyle Larson. You picked William Byron. We head to the Coke 600 this week, one of the crown jewels of racing. You and I both agreed it's one of our favorite race weekends of the year. Let's give our race winners and our sleepers, as we do at the end of every episode here before we drop the jack. And as I mentioned before, Cole, you've got first choice this week.
Ooh, boy, that is a tough decision right here. A lot of options. Honestly, this is a very tough weekend to decide because going through the stats for the next gen, there is not a whole lot of consistency at all from many drivers. I actually failed to mention the only drivers with top 10s in both starts in the next gen at Charlotte. First driver is obvious, Tyler Reddick, but the other 2 drivers were, ironically, Kyle Busch and Stenhouse. So that should tell you all you need to know about the makeup of how this race is run and what it takes to get it done. Man, I'm going to go with Denny Hamlin. He won the first next-gen race at Charlotte in the 600. I feel like the talk's all around Kyle Larson, obviously, for the double and his prowess on the mile-and-a-half tracks this year, but Denny Hamlin's been just a tick behind, and I think that he's been one of, if not the hottest driver next to Chris Buescher over the last month or so. So I like Denny Hamlin a lot this week for my race winner.
I feel pretty good about my picks. I agree with you. This was one of the tougher weeks because of the inconsistency we've seen at this track, and it's just such a long race. We've seen it every year. It's a war of attrition, this 600-mile race at Charlotte. But I'm going to go with a former champion. I really like Chase Elliott this week. Like you said, Cole, I think there's something to be said for the pride he takes in this event, a crown jewel, how well he's running, the consistency. I think he's one of those drivers, like you've seen guys like Denny Hamlin, William Byron win multiple races this year and really establish themselves as the drivers to beat in the garage. And I think over this summer stretch, we're going to start to see, as Kyle Larson's in that mold too, we're going to start to see Chase Elliott enter the fold as the next driver to win multiple races. And I feel like this is the week for that to happen for Chase. And for my sleeper pick, which the criteria we use are drivers that are outside the top 15 in odds, I will take Noah Gragson. I just love where that team's at. I know we've touted RFK carrying the torch kind of for the Ford stable. We've seen them in victory lane. We saw Penske in victory lane at the All-Star race. I think that Noah Gragson has been the most consistent Stewart-Haas racing car. You know, they want to flex their muscles. And, you know, you did all the talking about Noah, who scored his 5th top 10 at the last mile-and-a-half track. I just feel that on this package, at these kind of tracks, they've got things souped up for Noah Gragson. So he's my sleeper pick for the win this week.
I like both those picks a lot. Yeah, Chase is one that had a really good gut feeling about, and I would not be surprised at all if he went to victory lane. For my sleeper, I'm going to go with probably Alex Bowman this week. I know I could have went with Bubba Wallace, who I feel good about, but I do feel good about Alex Bowman and the Hendrick Chevys. They always run very well at Charlotte, and I think that stat line of 10th and 12th is really, really good. So I like him quite a bit this week, as well as his paint scheme you mentioned is probably, I know I didn't highlight that one, but it might be the best in the garage the entire weekend. So give me Denny Hamlin, give me Alex Bowman.
Well, this is one of the greatest race weekends of the year, Cole. We've talked about it a lot throughout this event, or throughout this podcast, but cannot wait for this one. It's going to be a 6:05 green flag on Fox. Let's see, favorite Coke 600 memories, Cole. I'm kind of putting myself on the spot here because we're going back to this tradition of thinking back to our favorite memories from certain race weekends, and there's just so many to pick from. Any that are coming to your mind?
Yeah, one's coming to mind because it popped up on my social media as it always does every goddamn year when we go to Charlotte. The 600 in 2011 where Dale Jr. ran out of fuel on the last lap. Last turn. Not a favorite memory, but it's a core memory. As a Dale Jr. fan back in the day, this one stung a lot, still stings. That was, he's mentioned it numerous times being one of his favorite races. It's the longest race of the year. It's big celebration, one of our crown jewels. And to see him come up short, half a lap, that one hurt, man. That one sucked big time.
Yeah, that's definitely a core memory. That was right when we got into the sport, and it was just literally the last turn. Like to have it stripped away like that was something. There's two that come to mind. You gave a bad one, so I'm going to give a bad one too. 2020, Jimmy Johnson's last season, when he was struggling to win, this was one of his best races. He had that dark green military-themed Ally 48 car, and he ran extremely well. I really thought he was going to win this race. Finished, I think it was second, and then he got disqualified. He did finish second. I just looked it up. And that was definitely a gut punch for me because after seeing how poorly that season was going, growing up the big Jimmy Johnson fan I was and how well he ran there, I was very optimistic. And then to see that disqualification after, wasn't very happy. But on the bright side of that, this is my favorite race weekend. He's my favorite driver. So how about 2014 when he qualified on the pole, dominated that race, and won the Coke 600 in one of the best patriotic paint schemes that we actually saw in recent years, a throwback paint scheme to. I think William Byron ran it, or it might have been Chase Elliott, but either way, that's easily my favorite Coke 600 memory. One of those races where it takes so long that if your driver has that kind of an agonizing defeat, it just stings a little bit extra. But this is going to be a really exciting race called the Coke 600, 6:05 Eastern Time, green flag, here on Fox. Great stuff as always, Cole. Thanks so much to everyone who tuned into this, the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day. We hope you can take something from here and turn it into some dough. So can't wait to kick back on my 8-hour bus drive coming up, Cole, and just watch this one and be entertained the entire time. It's going to be an exciting race. We are going to drop the jack. Thank you all so much for tuning into this episode of The Money Stop, and we will see you next week.